So this is my inner step sill on the MGC, well, what's left of it. I've taken off the real bad repairs that were there before, revealing a lovely great big rusty hole, as you can see by the arrows. Now I could go and just buy a replacement patch panel as shown in the picture, but apparently I'm a tight-fisted person who don't want to do that, so I'm going to make my own just to save a bit of money and for the fun of making things. This is the view through the firewall into the footwell, just depicting the inner step sill position, and there it is quite clearly, that top bit that goes from there down to the floor. So this is showing what I'm trying to achieve. The red lines show where I'm going to put a joggle or a slight bend in it, so that the new panel, the replacement panel, slips up underneath the old panel, giving me an extra width and extra strength to weld to. I should then be able to weld not only along the inside of the step sill, but also on the outside of the step sill where you can't see it behind the behind the sill. I've clamped a length of timber to the inner step sill, trying to give me a guide to run the grinder blade along to give me a nice straight edge. Making the patch panel for the inner step sill will be the last panel I need to make before I can actually start welding all the panels that I've made so far for this project. I don't cut any more out, as I think I would lose the integrity of the shape of the shell, but because I'm leaving the top of the step sill in, it gives me a bit of strength because it's an angle. Okay, this is just showing the cardboard template that I'd previously made. You'll see that I've temporarily replaced the firewall and the end of the footwell there, just so I can check that the template does butt correctly up to them, so I can get the bends correct. Having transferred the new cut marks onto the cardboard template and then transferring those marks onto the sheet steel, I'm now proceeding to cut out the shape. When I'm cutting out shapes in steel, I tend to use one of three different methods. One is the sheet steel cutters, which work superb. I also use the jigsaw with a good quality metal blade in it. Alternatively, I use the disc grinder. I prefer not to use the disc grinder, as it gives not a particularly good edge in my opinion, and I end up cleaning it up quite a lot. The jigsaw out of the three I actually prefer. I'm now bending the first bend, and from this bend everything else I'll have to check to make sure that the corresponding bends all end up in the right place. So I've put it on the press bender with the homemade bending tool to give me a 90-degree bend. Although the bender gives me a nice bend, I always do a final dress on the homemade anvil just to tighten up the bend and to give it that sharpness I like. Here I am starting to make a template out of the sheet steel to ensure that the bends end up in exactly the right place. Okay, so this picture shows what I'm making in the way of a template. Yeah, the red lines are showing the shape that I'm making and the shape that I've transferred onto the template. And there's the little template that I've made. As it happens, it didn't quite work right, and one of the bends, the second bend, ended up being about 4 or 5 mil out, so I had to remake it. But it was worthwhile making the template, because if I'd have done it on the final item and got it 4 to 5 mil out, it would have been a lot more work in order to hammer the steel straight, flat, and then to rebend it again. And then once you rebend it, to my mind, you never ever get a nice clean bend again. Having set the bead roller up, I am pushing the steel through in order to give the joggle which I spoke about earlier. Having made the mistake of pushing the steel the wrong way through the bead roller in the past, now what I do is I just grab an offcut of steel, run it through the bead roller, so I know which way the bead will actually be depressed into the steel. It saves a lot of aggro if you get it wrong. Changing over the 300mm press tool to the smaller one in order to make some more intricate folds. If you're interested in making these tools yourself, which are only made out of scrap, I have made a video on it when you look it up on my channel. have found this 20-ton floor press to be an extremely useful tool in the workshop, and I highly recommend that you consider buying one. As I'm showing here, with using some very simple homemade tools and the press, you can use it as a folder, as a box pan folder, and as well as making press patterns to form different shapes. Sometimes I even use it as a vise, just for using it for clamping down metal in order to hammer form or just to cut. And here is the finished section clecoed in position. It did take just a little bit of fettling to make it fit nicely, but I'm quite pleased with the way that it does fit. I did a bit of research as to what to paint onto the raw steel, and I came up with the cheapest option possible as usual, which is this Fortress Trade Zinc Galvanizing Spray from Screwfix at about, I don't know, £6 a tin or something. It was cheap, I thought it would do, but anyone that's tried to replace a floor pan or an inner step sill will know that it's the most awkward place to get to in order to weld. I did do some test welds on the bench first before I started to MIG the panel on, and they seem to work absolutely fine. But as usual, when you start actually welding on the car, things never quite work out the same, and it was a bit of a pig to weld, to say the least. As I said before, I did make a joggle on the top of this panel, so where I'm welding now there's actually quite a deep recess, so not only have I got to weld the panel on, but I've got to try and build up the weld within that recess in order to end up with a reasonably flat surface, because I don't want a panel that looks like it's been just stitched on over the top. So it did take a lot of welding and a lot of grinding, but I got there in the end. So I think this is what was causing my welding problems, the item in red. No, not the 18-year-old bit, the bit at the bottom that I've highlighted in red. It's spot weldable, doesn't say anything about using for seam welds. But once I'd realised this, I'd just run the wire cup on the grinder along where I wanted it to weld, and then things started to look much better. So rule of thumb, don't be like me, read the instructions. And here's the finished article, all welded up, all grinded down, and then I did put another coat of zinc spray over the whole lot just to stop any flash rustling. The whole process of welding took about 3 hours, I think, from start to finish. But it's not about the time, it's about the satisfaction of doing the job and knowing that you've made the panel yourself, and I'm very pleased with it. and thank you for watching, and please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe because it all helps towards my channel.